So with us now is Mr. David J. Anderson, who just held the keynote on the Kanban maturity model. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hi, glad to have you.
Thank you.
And with me as well is my colleague Sven Günther, who's a Kanban coach and who's translated the Kanban maturity model book into German.
Not yet, but...
Not yet? Oh, you're still at it.
we stopped translating the first edition because the second edition is on the way, so...
Cool.
Yeah, we thought it was better to wait and launch the second edition in the German market. Now, it's caused a bit of a delay. It took us longer to do the second edition than we hoped.
Yeah.
But I still feel it's better to release the second edition of the book, which is based on the 1.0, 1.1 release of KMM, rather than release a book based on the beta.
Yeah, so the Kanban maturity model itself is an evolution, it's ongoing.
Yeah, we made one or two little tweaks. We released the 1.1 in Europe this week, or 2 weeks ago in Brazil. But it's not a big change from the 1.0. It's one or two things that we didn't know where to put them on the model. We figured it out, so we added those things. But it's only 4 or 5 bullet points of small changes that were added in 1.1.
So for our viewers at home who haven't seen your keynote right now, what's the main takeaway? What should they know about the Kanban maturity model?
So the key thing is this, this play on the expression. There's no such thing as bad weather, there's only inappropriate clothing. So there's no such thing as bad Kanban, there's only inappropriate practices. And the point of the maturity model is to help them make some assessment, some understanding of the organization they're in, and to be able to advise on appropriate Kanban practices that are just challenging enough that the organization gets a little better, but not so hard that they choke on it and spit it out. So that's the key to the maturity model, is it's about appropriateness.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is it takes some pressure to grow an organization into a diamond.
Yeah, you need a little bit of stress to make it better. And now we have this codified coaching model in the same way that sports coaches have codified models for understanding the level that their student is currently at, whether they're footballers or gymnasts or swimmers or skiers or whatever. What's their current level, and what's the next set of practices to just push them out of their comfort zone and help them get a little better. And then gradually they work their way up to higher and higher levels of achievement.
Yeah.
So the Kanban maturity model is a sports coaching model for organizations.
Mm-hmm. We were just talking about Simon Wardley and his maps with Matthias Schröder. This sounds a bit like you're growing Kanban coaching into a utility. Like it's ubiquitous and everybody can do it.
I'd say we're codifying it so that it will have consistency and that we can scale it out to thousands of people.
Yeah.
With appropriate training. They can read the book, they can take the training, they can watch some conference videos, and they ought to, as long as they've got the reference material which they've either downloaded or they've bought the book, as long as they have those, they will be capable of using it as a playbook, and they should be reasonably successful with that. That we're hoping to really not just scale the very the large number. Instead of having 100 guys in the world who know how to do this advice, it can be thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps in a few years from now.
Sounds great.
And they will be reasonably competent. And what we're looking for is that they're capable of improving, producing an upside with very little risk of a negative downside.
That's always a good thing, as what's the name? Tawab has taught us.
And it's the medical professions thing of first do no harm.
Yeah, right.
So we want a large number of people in the world who are capable of first doing no harm and doing some good, and hopefully that's fairly consistent. That people who've read the book, taken the training, and of course as we scale out around the world, we train trainers like Sven, and then he trains other people. So we want that level of training to be consistent.
Yeah.
The maturity model, since 1.0, it's fairly stable because we took 3 years developing it with a community preview, 2 beta releases. But at the moment, what we're doing is evolving the training materials. So the training material is still beta because we're learning how to teach it.
Yeah.
It's one thing to define it, it's a second thing to learn how to teach it in a consistent manner.
Yeah. So in your talk, one thing that really stood out to me was this example of hiring. You said if you're hiring individual heroes, you're at maturity level 1.
Right.
So do you have examples of that? Like what's hiring at other levels like? So I can
well, first of all,
it.
the organizational maturity model, we synthesized it from a few sources, and that level 1 definition, or at least that piece of it, actually came from Jerry Weinberg in his book Software Quality Management.
Yeah, the old
quality software management from 1997. And level 1 is the hero programmer, the hero individual contributor. Right. And so I think if you're looking for recruitment, at higher levels, you're looking for people that have discipline, that take a pride in quality and consistency and collaboration and teamwork, and recognizing that it's an organization, a team, whatever the scale is, that produces an outcome. I'm sure if you went to a Formula One team, they'll tell you it's not the driver or the pit crew that wins the race. It's 700 people in a factory all working together collaboratively to put a race car on the track on a Sunday that's capable of winning. And you get into deeper maturity levels, you'll find people that think like that, people that are system thinkers, people that have an education in risk management, and they value or they appreciate that there's multiple stakeholders and they have to create some balance. But none of these things are particularly exotic. I think any of us who have children, we recognize good and bad parenting. If you bribe your children with candy bars when they behave badly, you know that you'll amplify the bad behavior. And we also understand things like when we decide the bedtime for the children, if the children argue back with, oh, the kids down the street, they go to bed at 9 o'clock, why do we have to go at 8:30? Strong parenting is to say, I'm the parent and this is our house. I decide when the bedtime is, and I don't care what the kids down the street are doing. So it's an absolute measure, not a relative measure. And those are the sort of behaviors that you see in higher maturity organizations, higher maturity leaders. It's not enough to be doing a little bit better than the competition. They measure themselves against the customer satisfaction or the outcome they're achieving in the market. And they recognize that they can always be doing better, right, regardless of whether the competition are strong enough to push them to that higher level. So you'll focus more on that. So individual contributors at high maturity level, you're looking for people with discipline, with professional pride, people who focus on quality, and you're looking for managers who have leadership skills and capabilities, and people who are system thinkers, and people who are more focused on the altruistic, service-oriented behavior of who's our customer and how well are we serving them, or who are our stakeholders and how well are we serving them, and recognizing that it's not important really what the competition is doing. That historically, strategy was about positioning yourself off against competitors, and modern day strategy is now, it's about customer empathy and being closer to the customer and serving them better. Those are the kind of behaviors we're looking for at higher maturity levels.
So looking at higher maturity levels, you just said, one example that stood out to me in your talk was that you said, as an example for level 6 maturity organization, the Royal House of Windsor.
Yeah.
So came as a surprise to me. I'd expected some cool company notes, but well, the British Crown.
Exactly.
That's impressive.
You have to think that when Queen Elizabeth ascended to the throne, the prediction was that she'd be the last monarch and that Britain would become a republic.
Yeah.
And not only has that not happened, no one's even talking about it anymore. It's widely assumed that Charles and then William and George will all accede to the throne.
Right.
And that the country and for that matter the wider British Commonwealth will continue to be constitutional monarchies. Maybe not Australia, but it's inconceivable that Canada wouldn't be a constitutional monarchy, for example.
Yeah.
And what we've witnessed in my lifetime is the survival of the House of Windsor, the survival of constitutional monarchy. And you're right, you know, it's not a trendy, fashionable company. It's a very old firm indeed.
Yeah.
And it just demonstrates that you can see really great leadership examples in older businesses.
Uh-huh. So sorry, Sven?
Can an organization be in two different levels? For instance, Volkswagen had to cheat a couple of years ago so that they can sell cars and make customers happy. And on the other hand, now they have to switch to electromobility. So,
I think that's very true, that the businesses where they have to reinvent, they have to innovate into new market spaces, it's natural that those business units are going to be lower maturity, at least to start with, because the whole market's emergent. They're having to learn new rules for doing many things, not just the way they make the product, but who's the customer, what are the customer expectations, and that could be evolving. And they go through this very early life cycle of enthusiasts and early adopters before they hit mainstream customers, and those customers' expectations are different. What an enthusiast wants from your product and what an early adopter wants and what a mainstream buyer wants, those are different, and that creates a certain level of stress and a pace of change, which means things aren't stabilizing. So I think it's natural that companies will have business units at different levels of maturity. I think you'll also find companies where you have better leadership in one business unit than another, and consequently you see higher maturity in the unit with the better leaders. And perhaps that's because they're not good at leadership development, and that in itself is a limitation to organizational maturity. Really high maturity organizations are good at leadership development. We see it in the military, for example.
Military, that's an interesting cue. You said that leadership by command is something that takes place in stressful situation. Now, last year at LKCE, we had David Marquet, who was a submarine commander. In his book and in his talk, he describes that, especially in stressful situations, he relied at the later stages of his command on self-organization and people working by intention, and he just signing it off. So that's different than just working by command.
So there's a need to give orders, and orders, properly given orders, are outcome driven. They teach military commanders when they're in officer training, as officer cadets, how to issue an order. And the idea is that the order communicates the outcome they're expecting and doesn't necessarily tell people how to do it. And you empower people by having rules of engagement, by having explicit boundaries, and then having the trust that people know what to do and that they're properly trained and they're capable of making their own decisions. That's how you move quickly. So you need to respond to some unfolding situation, perhaps a combat situation. You need people who are trained and empowered to move quickly, and that you have a trust in the system that they will follow orders, which means they will act within the boundaries, the constraints that have been placed on them by senior officers or by politicians. And you need that level of empowerment. It needs to be self-organizing in that sense. They need to think for themselves, make their own decisions. But the concept that from time to time a leader says, we're going to go over here and we're going to do it now, and it's not a committee meeting.
No, of course not.
We are doing this because I, as your leader, have decided we're going to do it, and I'm taking the responsibility because potentially people are going to die.
Right. So it's about setting the direction and setting the boundaries to go in that direction, and then having people run within that boundaries to that direction.
Right.
So
there are different. I talked about leadership by example. So if I lead by example, I go there and I hope people will follow me.
That would be Alexander the Great, who rode at the front of his army and didn't drink if the soldiers had nothing to drink.
So that's lead by example. And then leading by inspiring, I might give a wonderful speech and say, over there is a fantastic place to be and you should go there. That would be inspirational. And leadership by signaling, I would be saying, I'm very, I might signal in a way that says I'm very happy for people to go over there, and we'll still be friends if you go over there. So these leadership by signaling, it takes a long time to have an effect. Leadership by inspiration, it's a little bit faster. Leadership by example, it's faster still. And leadership by command is the fastest, but it's the one that carries the highest risk, in the sense that people might not like the command and they might rebel against it. So the risk to the leader and their leadership position goes up. So you should reserve leadership by command for the highest level, the most critical things,
right?
Because the stakes are the highest.
And it's about legitimacy. You have to be legitimized as a leader to be accepted by the people to follow you.
Exactly, and every time you make a command, you put that at some level of risk. So there's inherently an aspect of cost of delay associated with the appropriateness of a style of leadership, and we'll be codifying that stuff in the guidance. Probably not in the KMM second edition book, but there'll be this companion book we're planning on the leadership practices extension, and we will codify that into the training class. But the style of leadership that's appropriate has a lot to do with how much time you have available.
So now we've spoken about corporations and maturity. We've spoken about royal houses and maturity. I'm wondering, have you applied this model to nation states, to governments? What maturity levels do you see there?
Well, I've talked on the stage here in previous years about, for example, so with leadership maturity, which we've codified, I guess we could do it with nation states. We haven't really thought about it, but we see different levels of leaders, and I often use South Africa as an example. Because with Nelson Mandela, they had this level 6 leader who was reinventing the Rainbow Nation. And then he passed off the reins to the son of his own mentor. So Thabo Mbeki became the president after Mandela. And Thabo Mbeki's job was mainly just keep the train on the tracks, keep rolling for another 10 years in the direction we've been going. But in some ways, he abdicated his responsibility. He was an AIDS denialist. So he refused to have the government do anything about HIV or AIDS. And consequently, it's estimated 350,000 South Africans died when the medication was available or prevention methods were available, and the government did nothing to help. So while there were elements of Thabo Mbeki's leadership which were perfectly adequate, he was this level 0 leader when it came to AIDS and public health, and that set the nation back, and eventually the ANC ousted him as the president, replaced him with Jacob Zuma. Zuma was a very selfish, maturity level 1 leader, very corrupt, currently faces more than 760 charges of corruption since he himself was ousted. And now the new president is Cyril Ramaphosa, who was a prodigy of Nelson Mandela. And he is at least a level 5 leader, and I think South Africans are hoping he's the mini Mandela. You know, he's another level 6 leader, because a lot of damage was done by the corruption during the Zuma period.
Yeah.
So if the president of the country is corrupt, it signals to everyone else it's okay to be corrupt. So you end up with multiple tiers of corruption right through out the public sector and society, and perhaps in the private sector also. And some South Africans I talk with say it will take 25 years to repair the corruption damage that was done in Zuma's 9 years as president. So we definitely see the maturity model applying to leadership of nation states, but we haven't sat down and codified the maturity of nations. It's not something that we've thought about yet. Northern European countries, the Scandinavian countries, Germany and so on, they're widely recognised as higher trust societies. So the Netherlands, Germany, Scandinavia, Japan, and typically it's hard to achieve a high level of trust without a high level of maturity. These two things are related. Like low maturity you associate with corruption. A corrupt society is obviously not a trustworthy society.
Sure.
So the sociology work that's been done on social capital with nation states, so measuring the level of trust in a nation state, that exists in sociology, and I'm sure there'll be a strong correlation between that and the maturity of those nations.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. I'm still processing that. So Sven, what else to talk about?
About training classes? What do we offer for training classes for the...
So the Kanban maturity model is a 3-day training class, and then in addition to that we have 2 extra days of Kanban coaching practices. And the people who have taken all of that become Kanban coaching professionals. They have the skill set to lead an organization from maturity level 1, team level, through to a fully well-balanced, risk-hedged maturity level 4 organization. And they have the playbook, they understand how to use it. And you and I are teaching the class here in Hamburg in December. We're gradually expanding the number of trainers around the world. So, of course, you, Sven, are one of them. But we're developing 30 to 40 trainers around the world who'll be offering the KMM and the KCP classes around the world in their local languages and in their own regions in next year in 2020. And our goal is to put 1,000 people through those training classes by the end of next year and have 1,000 Kanban coaching professionals. And our feeling is that for every one of those we generate, we're going to help 150 to 300 people improve their organizations, improve their working environment, improve their customer satisfaction. So it's very high leverage that if we have 1,000 people out there, we're actually helping 150, 300,000 people around the world improve their workplace and serve their customers better. And I think that's a really strong contribution that we're making to society globally with the Kanban maturity model and our ability to scale it around the world.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so David, thank you for joining us.
No, thank you thanks for inviting me.
It's cool to hear you talk, and it's always inspiring to see where you take all these models. So I'm looking forward to seeing you around the conference and to chat again next year.
Of course, you're welcome. We'll see you next year.
Cool.
Okay, cool.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much.
Und das war es auch schon wieder für dieses Mal. Hat dir das Video gefallen? Dann gib ihm ein Like. Am besten klickst du auch direkt auf Kanal abonnieren, um in Zukunft ja nichts zu verpassen. Hast du Feedback, Anregungen oder Wünsche, schreib sie uns entweder in die Kommentare oder sprich uns auf dem nächsten Treffen einfach direkt an. Weitere Infos dazu, zu diesem Video und der Limited WiP Society selbst findest du in der Beschreibung. Bis bald!